Let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. We pray you'll bless our time together and pray that you will use this update in an edifying way and as a warning to people and help them to act appropriately on the information that we present here today. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, just a couple things. I did 2 midweek updates this week, or one on Monday, one on Wednesday. So some of this stuff is going to be a little bit repetitive today because I don't know how many people watch those midweeks in here, so I'm just going to sort of touch on some of the same issues again, mainly for my own edification because I want to make sure I got everything straight. So you can look at those. How many New World Orders is this? And I think Monday, I just called it Monday Update. I was very creative with that title. So today I'm going to talk this what in the world. As I sit here this morning, I was sitting here running through things and I had no clue what to put in the title here until about 3 minutes ago. There's a lot of stuff going on. I have all sorts of things spread across my computers and hard drives that I'm trying to collect. I know I'm supposed to do a talk in Canada next spring at the Last Days Bible Conference, but who knows if, people will be able to get across the border. So here's some of the platforms that we're on. I will also tell you that we have a new app. You can go to the Google or Apple app stores and download Fellowship Bible Chapel. Fellowship Bible Church won't do it, Fellowship Bible Chapel. And we are loading content to it, and my understanding is that this morning we are streaming live to the app. So if you want to go to the app, you can get it there. And we do stream on YouTube. Because we stream on YouTube, that limits some of the topics that I can talk about because of the police, the thought police that are out there getting after people on YouTube. So we talk about the acceleration events, how quickly things are happening. And I've been using this title for these covers from Foreign Policy for probably 10 years now. A world disrupted, and can we fix this? And the answer is, I don't think that there's any way things go back to what they were like in 2019. I said in 2020, boy, we're going to quickly want, when everything started to happen, lockdowns and all that sort of thing, and mandates, and do this and don't do that. I said, boy, we're going to wish for the days of 2019. Then in early 2021, I said, how far are we going to get into 2021 before we wish we could go back to 2020? And then this year I said, how far are we going to get into 2022 before we wish we could go back to the good old days of 2021? I just don't see this turning around. And so I talk about this acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding based in large part on this verse in Daniel that as we get closer to the end, Daniel's told to seal up the book till the time of the end. But at the time of the end, people will, I think, go back and forth, to and fro, run to and fro, go back and forth through the book of Scripture. And then as they look at Scripture in light of what's going on in the world, they'll have an understanding. And it says the wise will understand. In Daniel 11, it says will instruct many. And I think that that's a good pattern that we should follow. So I refer to this a lot about, God gave them over to vile affections. God gave them over to a reprobate mind, as it talks about in Romans chapter 1. And I think we see a lot of evidence of that in the world today. So I've tried to organize this, but I'm not sure that I've succeeded because there's so many things and they're all very closely interrelated. So enough of my rambling on about the problems of organizing these things. But here's one. So the Italian government has now failed. And I don't know how many that makes, 4 or 5 major governments over the past few weeks. There's a lot of disruption in the world. Sri Lanka has replaced their prime minister. The original prime minister fled. I thought he fled to the Maldives Islands, and he may have, but he ended up in Singapore, where he probably has some money stashed. The British government has, the prime minister is gone, Boris Johnson, and they're having a big fight in his party about who's going to replace him as head of the party. And then I read an article this morning, I think in the Times of London, that said, hey, you know who would really make a good prime minister, a leader of the Tory party? Boris Johnson. And it's sort of like, well, how long did his exile last? And say, he really doesn't, compared to how some of these people act when they're around each other and the people that want to replace him, it's maybe he wasn't so bad after all. And this is just the thing that we're seeing. Now, this is Mooney's face scrutiny after Abe assassination. So Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister of Japan, longest serving prime minister of Japan since World War II, was assassinated by a guy, came up behind him at a speech. They were having political elections in a few days. And the guy came up and shot former Prime Minister Abe, and he died. I think the first shot missed, and he hit him in the chest or something with the second shot when Abe turned to look at him. Well, now it turns out that, and you see this is from the Financial Times of London, Japan, world of delusion. Mooney's face scrutiny after Abe's assassination. It turns out that the mother of the assassin had given pretty much all the family's money, so much so that the family was bankrupted by giving money to the Unification Church, the Moonies. Now, this is a cult, and this has been a very strange thing to watch. If you want, like, super weirdness, and it's stuff that just is, what is going on? They have these videos, and they keep calling it Think Tank. Now it's Think Tank 2022. They're put up by the Unification Church and Mother Moon. These videos, and when the lockdowns were on, they would have these Zoom conferences, and they would have like this giant wall of monitors with all these people sitting there clapping like little robots for whatever happened at this conference. Slick video production, but kind of creepy. But one of the things that you find when you look through there is all these political leaders would come and do these talks for this think tank 2020, 2022. And you can find them. Some of them are in Korean, some are in other languages, some in English. And it's like, but they only have like 150 views. So if this is putting out the false teachings of a cult, they're not being very effective at it. That's the good news. But they almost worship, well, they do worship this Mother Moon. She was married to the founder of the Unification Church. He was 40. He first met her when she was 14. They got married when he was 40. She was 17. She had 12 or 14 children. She's a doctor. She's a billionaire. Moon died. He spent time in prison for federal tax evasion. But he'd given a lot of money to, like, I don't know how to say this without being unkind, because they actually had me down to speak at one of the schools, the Liberty University. And when you look through the think tank videos, you'll see Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, is speaking at this conference, as are other people like Mike Pence, Newt Gingrich, Mike Pompeo. But the way they're produced, so I think one argument could be, no, that's artificial intelligence. Those guys didn't really do that. They made it up. And another one was Jonathan Falwell. pastor of the Thomas Road Baptist Church. And look, I know the Unification Church gave millions to Liberty University and helped bail them out at one point. But it's a cult. Paula White is speaking in these videos. Why would you be associated with this cult in any way? I don't know what they get paid. I assume you get paid to do this, but it's very troubling. And so the Moonies are being looked at because this assassin's mother had given extreme amounts of money, so much so that it bankrupted the family. And you see here this picture, they always had these giant weddings where all these couples are getting married. And when Moon married his wife, she was his second or third wife, I believe, he was going to marry her because he considered himself the coming of the Messiah, the second coming, and by somehow he was going to marry her and keep her isolated for a while, and we're going to remove the stain of original sin. It's very bizarre stuff. And she comes out at these conferences now, she's probably approaching 80, I would guess. They thought that her family members would take over, but a lot of them are corrupt or married, divorced, and not qualified. So she's hanging on. Crazy. So this is kind of an interesting thing. This is the NPR, National Public Radio, is going to launch a disinformation reporting team. Now, I feel a whole lot better about the world knowing that NPR is on the disinformation thing. And my response to this was, hey, NPR, take a look in a mirror if you want to see disinformation. This subject keeps coming up. Not too much in detail, but this was pushed by BlackRock. I have a video. I can never find it on Sunday mornings when I'm trying to do it. I have a long video of Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, which is the largest investment fund in the world, controls over $11 trillion, although they've really got hit hard by the latest downturn. But one of the things that BlackRock has been pushing is this ESG, environment, social, and governance. It's also pushed by the major accounting firms like EY. EY has an ESG group. Major law firms have ESG practice groups. And they kind of roll into that, the DEI stuff. You know what DEI is? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all the major law firms now have diversity, equity, inclusion seminars and people, because, we got to make everything, we got to get all the social justice in. Sidebar comment here, if you put a modifier in front of justice, it's probably not justice. You're changing it. So this ESG it's big on the environmental. But this is The Economist. This is the one of the tip sheets for the party of Davos, as one person says. And it just says that 3 letters that won't save the planet. But this is being pushed, funded in large part by Russia, because what does it do? It gets us, we fell for it. Shut down a lot of our oil and gas production. Now we got to go to Russia or Saudi Arabia, and guess what happens? Price goes up, Russia makes money, Saudi Arabia makes a lot of money, they can do things. And it's changing the world. And did anybody vote for this? No, it's just being pushed, and now they want to push it through the Securities and Exchange Commission. You'll see, I looked at somebody's, I was looking up a company. I was looking up Dun & Bradstreet, which gives a business report about whether a certain business is paying their bills and that type of thing. And at the bottom of this, at Dun & Bradstreet, it says, what is XYZ company's ESG score? Everybody's getting an ESG score. They've had these seminars. This was just last week, the Aspen ESG. And, they never go to Newark, New Jersey, or Ohio for these seminars. It's always Aspen, Davos, Cayman. It's always someplace pretty nice. So they had this mindset and metrics, the art and science of driving change. And this is what they want to do. This is what Larry Fink said in that video I can never get my hands on when I want to put it into my presentation. He said, listen, I'm doing this to change people's behavior. I'm not doing it necessarily for investment returns or anything like that. I'm doing it to change behavior. He's right. It has changed people's behavior. Look what it has done to gas and oil production. And then you get an administration like this that is fully on board with ESG and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you have what I would consider to be a mess. Here's some of the companies that were sponsors of the recent Aspen, Walmart, Johnson & Johnson, Prudential, Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen and Katz. That's a big law firm. EY, used to be Ernst & Young, Ford Foundation, Citibank. Quick story about Citibank. I once had a problem with Citibank. And it would take too long I was on the phone with them for hours. Pam was listening to it. And finally, at the end of it, we owed them like $20 on what had been a second mortgage, but then became a first mortgage when we paid off our first mortgage. So we had $20 on our house on that mortgage. And we wanted to pay it off. And they gave us instructions, and they said, well, nobody would tell you to do that. They filed how we found out about it was they filed a notice of foreclosure, intent to foreclose on our house. Over $20. Finally, at the end of the conversation, I told the guy, I said, listen, you sound like a nice guy, but at the beginning of the conversation, it said that this thing would be recorded for training purposes. So listen, do yourself a favor. Go get the recording, save it to your phone, and someday when all you and your little friends that I've talked to tonight at Citibank are sitting around Starbucks someday wondering why Citibank went out of business, play this recording. And Pam will verify that I did actually say that. And so this is what we see. So you have this big push to change everything through these rules and regulations. And the Biden administration is doing this. They want to put in abortion rules, even though I don't know that they can do an abortion statute. I think it passed one or both houses with some Republican support, a thing to enshrine gay marriage into the law of the United States. Now, I don't know that they get to do that, but you know what they're trying to do is they're trying to control how it's interpreted everywhere in the event that it's overturned by a Supreme Court that decides that, no, this is something that should be left up to the states, like the issue of abortion. And they act like this decision, the Dobbs decision, banned abortion. It did not. Wish that it had. And so now they're having these protests. So here's a protest they had outside the Supreme Court, and you saw the headlines. It's like AOC arrested, Ilhan Omar arrested. Look at them. They're being led away in shackles. Are they? So here's AOC in her arrest. This is actually a video that took place. There she goes. Apparently she's got handcuffed behind her back. And now she slips the bonds and she's able to give the power salute. And then here's Ilhan Omar. There's AOC, and then Ilhan Omar, she's going to join in. And here she comes. Oh, she's going on too. Look at her. She doesn't even have a cop. She doesn't even have handcuffs on. It's all fake. All fake. She says this, I will continue to do everything in my power to raise the alarm about the assault on our reproductive rights. Somebody said, I think the obvious was, I'm not so sure I want some of these people reproducing anyway. I'm opposed to abortion, but it's sort of like, the percentage of people that really support unrestricted abortion has gone down. And part of that is because people that really support abortion don't have kids. So there's not a generation to replace it. This is the disappearing people in the world. Count the number of places this week that you go where there's not a help wanted sign. And part of this is because people are quitting work, they're leaving the workforce. They can't find workers. I read newspapers all over the world. Every country that I read a newspaper and I read something about their economics, every single one, the UK, Israel, Saudi Arabia, they're saying, where are all the workers? We can't find the workers to do the jobs. And it's going to become a problem, increasingly become a problem. So if you have somebody that you know that does work, like handyman and that type of thing, hold on to them like grim death, because it's going to get tougher and tougher to get people. But some people who do have jobs have completely lost their minds. This is an article by the great Christopher Rufo at City Journal, and he's been writing on this, on diversity, equity, inclusion, and the trans agenda, LGBTQ agenda that's being pushed into public schools. And so this week he published a big article. You can download the seminar presentations in the LA Public School District, the second largest school district in the United States. They have, as he says in the opening paragraph here, Los Angeles Unified School District has adopted a radical gender theory curriculum, encouraging teachers to work toward the breakdown of our gender binary, to experiment with gender pronouns such as they, ze, and tree, and adopt trans-affirming programming to make their classrooms queer all school year. A friend of mine pointed out on his Facebook page, well, wait a minute, if it's the choice becomes, binary and non-binary, that's a binary choice. Think about it. It doesn't make any sense. They're insane. And, we talk about religion in schools. We don't want religion in schools, they say, right? So who's this guy? What is this public school system promoting? Faith Time, Christ Chapel of the Valley, Gerald Wells, Reverend. Religion is a powerful life force for many people. Attitudes about LGBTQ plus are improving, but some people continue to feel conflict between being true to their faith and being true to living authentically as an LGBTQ person. So you see how he made the choice? True to your faith or true to your identity? I would say the choice is being true to your faith or being an apostate. That's the choice. But they bring this guy in. Now, are they going to bring in any of our, all the pastors we know in Southern California? They're going to bring any of them in to give an alternative view about the being true to your faith part? I doubt it. This workshop will equip practitioners with tools to give assurance to students of all faiths and respond to religious objections within the mandate of being religious neutral, which is not religious neutral. It's anti-true to the faith. They're lying. And they're pushing this at the federal government level. Here is our, the first female admiral.
So we really want to base our treatment and to affirm and to support and empower these youth, not to limit their participation in activities and sports, and even limit their ability to get gender affirmation treatment in their state.
Okay. So where do you think the government's coming down on the true to your faith side of this, the federal government? And they're going to push this. They're going to push it like you've never, especially if they think they're losing the elections at the midterm. It's just going to be bad. So I'm sure you saw this article or this thing. Lee Zeldin, a sitting congressman, is running as the Republican candidate for governor of the great state of New York. I should say the great state of Upper New York. because the lower part of New York is insane in many respects. So, by the way, the guy who was arrested for defending himself, and he killed the guy who came in Harlem to the little convenience store bodega and started attacking him, and the guy picked up a knife and stabbed him and killed the guy. The charges were finally dropped against him this week. Isn't that amazing? By the way, if you can get a hold of Dennis Prager's podcast, he interviewed Simone Gold about her guilty plea and what happened with her. She was participated in events in January of 2021. She got sentenced to 60 days because she was charged with a crime that if she goes to trial in front of a Washington, D.C. jury and loses, she goes to jail for 20 years. She approached the Capitol. She asked if it was okay to go inside. She was waved in by the police. She went inside. She's going to do 60 days in federal prison, and it's not going to be a federal prison camp. It's going to be in like a medium security federal prison. This, I am telling you, we have been taken over by a bunch of radical thugs in this country. Part of me hopes there's a change in the next election and it's payback time. And it needs to be done with the intensity that it was done to them, or done to us, done to people that disagree with the people in power. So anyway, so Zeldin, a sitting congressman, GOP nominee for governor, goes to up near Rochester, I think it was called Fairhope, New York, and this guy shows up. Comes up on stage and rushes Zeldin. Zeldin grabs his arm, wrestles him to the ground. He's got a knife. The guy is arrested. He's put into the great New York justice system and released within a couple hours on his own recognizance. No bond. He tried to kill a congressman. And under the laws of New York, you don't have to put up a bond to get out of prison. Now, you know what I would have done? I would have held him over the weekend. And I would have said, okay, we have it on video. We have the witnesses. Your trial starts Tuesday at 9 o'clock. And convict the guy and put him away. And stop this nonsense of trials 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. So somebody photoshopped this. This is Greenwood Park Mall in Greenwood, Indiana, south of Indianapolis. And you know the story. Was it last Sunday or Saturday or Sunday? Guy came out of the restroom. You see where the X is in the center of that photograph? Came out of the restroom, shot and killed 3 people, wounded at least 1 more. And he was loaded. He could have gone for a long time. A 22-year-old guy was there, legally carrying because they had changed the Indiana law and put it in place the week before. So this guy, 40 yards away when it started, pulls out his firearm, fires 10 shots, hits the guy 8 times and kills him. He saved a lot of lives. Now, I applaud. I think this guy is a hero. And if you disagree with that, I really don't care. Because a lot of people are now alive today because this had no formal training. His grandfather taught him. Give the grandfather a medal too. And he doesn't want to do any interviews until the people have mourned for the people that were lost. This kid is like, can you imagine if he had been down at Uvalde school? What happened down there? There were 369 police officers, law enforcement people. They're standing in the hallway using the hand sanitizer, checking their watch. A guy who tried to go rescue his wife was held back by other cops. I say, get this kid and clone him. I cannot explain it. I cannot explain it. Well, I think cowardice is a beginning. something is not right with what happened there. Children died. But I'm just saying, if this guy, I think his name's Elishu or something like that, from Seymour, Indiana, if he'd been in Uvalde, I don't think, certainly wouldn't have 20 children dead or whatever the number was. And I know people say, oh, it's terrible that person died. Listen, whatever you want, you believe whatever you want. And I'm going to believe the right way on this. So central bank digital currencies are coming. What will the consequences be? This is a report this week. Currencies are the lifeblood. Let's see here. Of trade in the economy. If a currency fails, the entire economy fails. Yet most people rarely think about the health or buying power of the money in their pocket. People don't research how often currencies actually falter and how common it is for inflation or stagflation to strike nations. They just assume that it's going to always be the same. This lack of interest in how money works is likely to, and I cannot remember where I got this article, but if you just type in central bank digital currencies are coming, what will the consequences be on a search engine, I'm sure you'll find it. And so the question is, what's going to happen? Look at some of the things from this article. The bankers need a new system which allows them total control of every single penny from creation to circulation. They want the ability to make money appear or disappear in real time. More than that, they want the ability to track every single dollar, including who has them and what they are using them for. They want to be able to micromanage trade and thus achieve a financial totalitarian empire. Enter central bank digital currencies based on blockchain technology. And here's a tweet from the Bank of International Settlements, which is sort of like the central bank of all the central banks, located in Basel, Switzerland. We complain about the Federal Reserve. Well, these are the people that sort of the Federal Reserve does answer to, because they don't answer to anybody else. And they said here, based on a recent report and survey that they've done, that 9 out of 10 respondent central banks are engaged in some form of central bank digital currency work, according to their survey. The share developing or piloting CBDC has almost doubled on year to 26%, while 6 out of 10 are doing experiments and proofs of concept. And so there's the report that you see, BIS papers, gaining momentum, results of the 2021 BIS survey, and they show how the thing has gone up. Here's some other charts that they have, and you can see from just about 60% in 2017 to over 90% today, it's coming. It's like it's got momentum. I don't know how it stopped. But the concern is that they're going to tie this to social credit, to your ESG score, to your DEI score, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The advent of CBDCs could mean that money and economic participation will become privileges, not rights. Digital trade could be tied to a social credit system, much like the one that exists in communist China. Want to access your checking and saving accounts? Better not say anything critical of the establishment, or you could be reported by a neighbor or stranger by cell phone app and have your money disappear in seconds. The onus will then be on you to prove that you are loyal and get access back. You are guilty until proven innocent. This is a big concern. And this is coming, and this does tie in, I think, with this coming mark of the beast system. I mean, we've talked all these years in Bible prophecy about, how are they going to do this? Now they have the technology to prevent people from buying or selling. And all they got to do is flip a switch. And we know it's coming, and it appears to be here, and it's very close. The U.S. is developing theirs. They said they were going to study it. My guess is at the end of the study period, which I think runs out in September, they will come out with a central bank digital currency. Now, some of the CBDCs are saying they're going to be tied to gold or something else of value. And I think that would be good for currency to be tied to something of value, which it's not. Now it's just paper, and it's based on faith, that the money is worth something. But this is going on all over the world. food crises. And I'll talk a little bit more about some things in just a moment. So let me just cover a couple things that I just sort of touched on a little bit last week. So they had this big meeting. Joe Biden went to the Middle East. He went to Israel. Then he went down to Saudi Arabia, and they had a meeting with the Gulf Coast countries. They issued statements at the end. It was called the Jeddah Summit for Security and Development. And, they all got there in a big fancy table, and they talked, and they all made statements, and then they signed some agreements. And I think that most people, when they look at it, they conclude that it just didn't go that well for the United States. Biden, well, I'll say what I think. Biden got rolled. He went to the Palestinian Authority, and they took advantage of him. And he came out with this ridiculous statement about, I grew up Irish, and we were oppressed by a colonial power, the British. And what he did, and I agree, I'd go get Caroline Glick's article on it at Jewish News Service or Jewish News Syndicate. And she says what Biden said was as much a slur against the nation of Israel, the nation state of Israel, as anybody has ever said from another government. And I agree with her 100%. And it appears that his remarks were prepared because he had an Irish poem that he cited. Listen, you're going to recite that poem from memory, right? The way he is. I mean, he didn't even really remember where he's going a lot of times. So one of the things he went there was he wanted to get the Saudis to agree to pump more oil. Now, this is a very interesting situation. The world is short of oil right now. What happens when the world is short of oil? Prices go up. Now, everybody says in our government, well, just get an electric vehicle if you're concerned about the price of gas. A fully tricked out Tesla will run you about $110,000 if you can find one because of chip shortages and that sort of thing. And by the way, do you go by and look at some of the car lots around Columbus? There's no cars. Like Tansy Toyota over on Sawmill Road. I don't want to give them an ad, free advertising, but I bought cars there in my life. There couldn't have been 5 new cars on the parking lot. I used to work for a law firm. We represented one of the largest, if not the largest, car dealers in the world. And they used to floor plan 7,500 cars at a time. And they're down in the southeast part of Columbus. They don't have 7,500 cars on their lot. They park the cars along the fence along Route 33, so it looks like they've got a bunch of cars. But if you look over the cars, there's nothing there. And this is changing. In fact, one of the next big things, we talk about student loans going bad. Reading an article in Financial Times or Wall Street Journal yesterday, car loans is coming big time. Car loans are now in default at a rate of about 25% across the country. So the recommendation was if you need a car, and we have one family in the congregation who needs a car right now because of an accident last night. Praise the Lord, they're okay. But they said, well, wait a year because the prices on used cars are going to fall like you wouldn't believe. Because these loans are going to go into default, the cars are going to be repossessed. Everything is unwinding on many levels. So they went to Saudi Arabia and they said, pump more oil. And the statement after Biden left and everything was, I'm sorry, but we are producing the maximum amount of oil that we can produce right now. We don't have any more. We can't pump anymore. Now, that could be due to two things. There's a concept called peak oil, that there's only a certain amount of oil out there. They call it fossil fuels, but I don't know that there were ever that many dinosaurs that died that caused all that. I think it's a process within the earth. So, but the question is are we going to reach a point where we're running the world out of oil? That's called peak oil. Now, some people reject the concept of peak oil, but regardless of what it is, whether that's true or not, the Saudis said, we don't have any more capacity than 13 million barrels per day. And that's because there's a physical limitation on how much you can produce. You just don't say, okay, well, go buy an electric cars, America, if we're not producing enough oil for you to make gas. Did you see the exchange with our esteemed Secretary of Transportation, Peter Buttigieg, this week in Congress? The congressman asked him and said, Secretary Buttigieg, you advocate electric cars. How much electricity will somebody use in an average year to charge their vehicle? And he tried to immediately change the subject. And he says, no, we're gonna stay in this question because it's my time. How much electricity does it take? He said, Secretary Buttigieg, do you understand that in a world where they're telling us not to turn on lights in some countries because it's a stress on the grid when there's high demand on electricity, don't turn your lights on at night. But electricity has to come from the same place that your lights come from. And it takes a person in Texas will use 4 times the amount of electricity to charge one electrical vehicle in the course of a year versus the electricity that they use to air condition their home in hot Texas. The whole thing is insane. Now, the next thing that Buttigieg is going to do is says, well, you can always ride a bike. I know he's going to say this, and this is the kind of people that we have. So there was that. Now, this is a little bit repetitive of what I talked about, and I'll try to keep this short. You can go look at my Wednesday update where I talked about this meeting that took place in Tehran with Russia, China, and Russia, Turkey, and Iran. The leaders of those 3 countries got together. It was a very important meeting, and as soon as it happens, we see Russia, Turkey, Iran. Bible prophecy circles, everybody's running around. Ezekiel 38 is going to happen tomorrow. Now, I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow. I actually think there's another war probably that's going to happen involving Iran and Israel before that. But, and that goes back to my logistics thing. If there's an argument. Is Russia part of this in Ezekiel 38? And when does it happen? And some say it's 3.5 years before the 70th week starts, and others say it's in the early part of the 70th week, and others say it's near the end of the 70th week, and everybody argues about it, and everybody gets upset with everybody else because they just don't see it their way. And I'm like, I have my idea. I think it's actually later. That's my personal opinion. But based on studying scripture and that type of thing. But I also know that when we make up our little timelines about future events, we're making a timeline about something that hasn't happened yet. So it's a timeline based on some speculation, regardless of how informed you are. And the best way to understand how prophecy is going to be fulfilled is when the prophecy is actually fulfilled. And then you can say, that was how that was going to work out. Everybody's a genius then. So anyway, so they had this meeting, and before the meeting, there were a couple things that took place. So there was this nuclear warning shot by Iran. They also had their foreign secretary. So there was this report that came out, and it said, look, Russia leaders have been seen at drone bases in Iran. And Jake Sullivan, Assistant Secretary of State in the United States, came out and said, look, they want drones from Iran to use in Ukraine. Now, the Iranian guys came out and said, well, no, we're against the war in Ukraine. That was a week ago Friday. We're against the war in Ukraine. We don't like what Russia's doing in Ukraine. We're kind of doing the same thing in Syria, but we don't like it when Russia does it. And historically, Russia and Persia have always been at each other's throats. And Iran is one of the big drone powers in the world. This is one of the things that has sort of been a game changer in military and technology, is the development of drones. And two of the biggest drone powers in the world, you got the United States, you got China, but you have Iran and Turkey. And if you can go and drill down into the Turkey, their top drone specs versus the specs of the top drone that Iran sells. And you're going to find that the Turkish drone is actually pretty much superior. And it's very easy to go find when they had that Azerbaijan dust up about a year and a half ago. The Turkish drones they performed unbelievably well. I mean, they have some of these things, they can stay aloft for 30 hours. They can carry a payload. They can follow you. They use artificial intelligence. They're very, very, very well done. And Iran keeps releasing these videos of their underground drone bases. So Iran comes out a week ago Friday and says, we wouldn't be selling them drones. We don't really like this war in Ukraine. We're against war, which is the way the Iranians negotiate. So they had this meeting. So there were all these little things at the meeting. For example, here is Putin. This is what's on the Kremlin website. He gets there. And but then you go to the video, and this is what it looked like when he actually got off the plane. He kind of walks down the steps a little bit like he's a 70-year-old guy. And so immediately everybody's all over Twitter and elsewhere saying, oh, look, he's sick. He must have cancer or something like that. But the interesting thing is the CIA comes out and says, we don't think he's sick. We don't think he has anything. Except, he might have a fear of germs because he has that giant table that he sits at with all the leaders that come. But it was very interesting, the interaction that took place on this trip, because, for example, here is Putin arriving at Raisi's office in Tehran. And you'll see he's going to get out of it. This is after the airport. He drives over to Raisi's office for a meeting. And he's going to get out here. It's very interesting. There's a diplomatic protocol to these things. And what do you see happen? There's really nobody there to meet him. Now, when Erdogan, I don't have the video up, when Erdogan got there, they had band, they had army guys, they had the red carpet there, but they had this big, long red carpet. Raisi came out halfway and met Erdogan, and then they walked, they posed for pictures. They didn't do that for Putin. And people who watch these things think, I think there's some kind of payback going on, because what you find out is, this is Pravda from January or February. Raisi went to Moscow to meet with Putin, and he ended up, nobody met him, and he had to walk around outside for a while. So this is Pravda. This is their main mouthpiece thing, sort of taking a shot at Raisi. So I personally think that there was a payback time. But look, they got together, and eventually they had their handshake and everything, and all was forgotten. Now remember, this was from a couple years ago in Sochi. Erdogan had come to meet with Putin, and I've sped up the video. And he's there waiting to meet Putin, and Putin makes him wait like 2 minutes. This is sending a message diplomatically about who's in charge. And so eventually Erdogan says, I'm going to sit down for a while. And then eventually they say, okay, you can go in. And then everybody's buddy-buddy. My video got corrupted, and I can't show you, though, that when Putin was going to meet Erdogan, Putin got to the room first, and Erdogan kept Putin waiting for a minute. And it was the Turkish news agency that focus on Putin's face, and he's there going, he's like, for like a minute. It's you can find it on the internet. It's kind of funny. So it's kind of interesting the way that the logo thing shows up there. It's Makba. Like I'm mocking Erdogan by what I did here. So Putin meets with Khamenei. And this picture kind of looks off. It looks like Khamenei's a lot bigger than Putin. I kind of played around with it. I'm not sure it's as significant as I thought it was. Here is Khamenei meeting with Raisi and Erdogan, and you can see that there's kind of a difference in the proportion. Same room. I mean, it's the same photo on the wall, same flag, hung the same way, same end stands and everything. So I don't know. Were they trying to make a point? It could be. And somebody told me, well, Putin's shorter than Erdogan, but I just don't know. So they had the big meeting. They had this. Here you can see Putin is shorter than everybody. Erdogan's about 6'2". I'm guessing Putin's about 5'8" or so. They got there. They all gave their speeches. They talked about what they wanted to get about it. Now, after they get out of there, what we find. By the way, Erdogan gave the longest speech by far of the three guys that were there. And Raisi was chairing the meeting. And they were sort of like, Erdogan's going on and on. So if you want to read a pretty good analysis, there's a guy named Escobar. He writes for a thing called The Cradle. You can find it at Zero Hedge about the meeting. It's called... emailed it to myself. The power troika trumps Biden in West Asia. And what you find out, too, is you find out that they had this right before the meeting started. Yeah, so everybody's always got this thing they want to accomplish. So the Turkish newspapers were saying Erdogan wants to talk about Syrian refugees and sending them home because they've got like 3.5 million in their country, and it's a drag financially. They want to get rid of them. But the Syrians don't want them back because they're the ones they drove out in the first place. They're from the Sunni areas, and they essentially purged them. And they got them to go to Jordan, they got them to go to Lebanon, they got them to go to Syria, or to Turkey. And then he also was talking about, he wanted to talk about invading, getting something done about the border area because there's Kurdish terrorists there. So they always say what they want to do. Well, what happened was that Russia and Iran announced that there was a $40 billion contract entered into between Gazprom, the Russian gas company, and Iran. And part of it was to help Iran build up its technology so they can produce more gas. And there were some other things. You remember last year, Iran and China entered into that big 25-year-long agreement. So you see this alliance forming, and you see it happening. And then they also talked about there was a big trade corridor that went from Russia through Iran down all the way to India, and they're already using it to get around the sanctions. So Iranian technology in their gas fields because of sanctions, this stuff is not that good. So Russia says, we'll help you build it up. So that was part of what came out of there. And of course, there was the big group handshake at the end of the conference. It always is interesting to watch these guys. It's sort of like, often one of us like, can you imagine how boring your life would be if you had to go run around and sit and listen to speeches by Erdogan and Putin? Of course, I sit around and listen to speeches made by them, but having to travel all halfway across the world and that type of thing to listen to these guys and then act like your buddy. So everybody kind of came away with things. There were alliances announced. It wasn't a lot of, it's kind of a loose alliance, which I think eventually, if they're all involved in the Ezekiel 38 thing, it's going to be a loose alliance anyway. But this was the headline of the Tehran Times the day after the meeting. New World Order. So that's what I titled my midweek update. How many New World Orders is this now? And somebody said, well, there's really only one. There are just a bunch of different pieces to it, and everybody's trying to do it. And Putin has his own agenda. So here's a lady from the National, Joyce Karam. I thought she got a pretty good analysis of what happened. Putin arrived 3 hours late, met with Khamenei. But then she says this, he got Khamenei's backing in Ukraine. And so even though on the Friday before, Iran's going, we don't support Russia in Ukraine. Now they're allies. That's kind of interesting. How quickly did that change? And they want to get rid of the dollar, but Iran, I don't think really wants to do that right now because people that they pay to do their bidding all over the world want to do trade in dollars. And so, but the big deal was that Iran's supposed neutrality in Ukraine has gone. They're now an ally of Russia. Then there was also this talk about, hey, we need to get an agreement because there's a lot of wheat locked up, 25 million tons or more of wheat from last year that's locked up in Ukraine. It's going to spoil soon. We got to get that out. The only port that's still open is Odessa, but it may or may not have mines. Sometimes in a war, they say, we mined the harbor, when they really didn't, because they just don't want anybody using it. So that's what Ukraine did. We mined the harbor at Odessa in southwest Ukraine. Did they or not? Who knows? They haven't been using the harbor. And that was the harbor the port where the food was going to get out of Ukraine. They really can't do it by truck or train because there's a war going on. So they said, well, we want, so Erdogan says, look, I'm such a good guy, I care about everybody. I will mediate some kind of deal between Russia and Ukraine to get the grain out of Ukraine and help alleviate this world food crisis. Now, quick comment on that. Folks, there is a food crisis. How severe it is going to be will a lot of times depend on where you live. But we know Sri Lanka has been melting down over it. The Italian government just failed. They're having riots in Panama. They've had riots in Ecuador. And Panama and Ecuador grow a lot of food. But there's a lot of things going on with the price of oil, gas, diesel, that type of thing. It's just putting extreme stress on the world food supply system. Now, I haven't noticed too much around here, except prices are up. But I haven't noticed a lot of empty shelves. But I have people in other parts of the United States write to me and say, our shelves are pretty empty at some of our stores. So there's supply chain issues, there's food issues. Now you got the World Health Organization came out and said, hey, this monkeypox thing is a crisis. Here we come with another crisis. The Biden administration is saying, hey, we have a climate crisis because it's been hot everywhere. They had record heat in some parts of the UK and France and elsewhere. It only lasted for a couple days. But the UK authorities were saying thousands could die. Now, I don't know that thousands did. I haven't read that anywhere. But they had roads that were melting, and it was very hot. I think the highest temperature ever recorded in Scotland. Now, it was 80-something, I think, which is, we're like, that's the day we want to go outside. But they don't have air conditioning in a lot of places, just like places, San Francisco, they don't have much air conditioning. Seattle does not have much central air. So anyway, so they wanted to get together. This is interesting. Khamenei tweeted this just before the meeting, that Palestine is the world of Islam's top issue. So you got to always remember the Palestinians. So they wanted to negotiate this grain deal. So this is a farmer picture taken in Ukraine last week in the Financial Times, and you see the explosions in the distance. And so then CNN got some video from people at the Ukrainian armed forces, and you see the fields there are filled with holes. And then I think there's a video here where the guy is harvesting the field, and you see it's on fire behind him. So this is war. I mean, this is having an impact on the world food system. Now, Ukraine is, I don't know that I would call it the breadbasket of the world. It's one of the most important food growing regions. They're, I think, number 5 or 6 in exporting of wheat. But their soil is rich enough, if properly managed. There were some studies done that said Ukraine could feed the world. They have like 8 feet of topsoil. And it's going on. So they get together. I mean, here's this Iranian guy who comes out also. He's the head of the Strategic Council on Foreign Relations. His name is Saeed Kamal Karazi, and he does an interview with Al Jazeera, and he essentially says, listen, we could produce a nuclear weapon. Now, you need to pay attention to this guy, because this has never really been said by the Iranians before. They've always kind of denied it. Now, this guy comes out and says, we could produce a nuclear weapon, but of course we don't want to, because, we have this fatwa in place that prohibits us from producing nuclear weapons. The IEA came out and said that Iran was galloping ahead in its production. There was, these are reports. I mean, this is all kind of mixed together. Mossad agents supposedly arrested in Iran. Iran, is producing all these videos about their drones, and they do have a lot of drones. There's a lot of talk about tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia, or all of these things. But then they went to Ankara, Guterres, and Erdogan, and they brokered an agreement between Ukraine and Russia to get the grain out of Ukraine. And so here's some videos from, and here's a guy, he tweeted this: history 100 years from now, humanity faced the danger of starvation. The US, EU, and UN could not find a solution. Turkish President Erdogan has solved the problem. That will be written in history in 100 years. If there is 100 years, and somebody's writing history in 100 years. But, they had this big meeting, and they signed this agreement. And I'm sure I have this agreement someplace. Well, here's the Wall Street Journal. I kind of whoops, that's not the right one. Here it is. Kind of photoshopped in the huggy thing and the headlines. So this is big news. I mean, this is a big deal. Iran has come out with news article. This is in Thursday's paper. Arab opinion is now turning against normalization with Israel. Now, this is, I think, Iranian propaganda. But, when Biden went, they wanted to get more people into the Abraham Accords. They wanted to get more normalization. But is Saudi Arabia going to come, or are they not going to come? That's the question. Now, I don't think Saudi Arabia is going to come until the king dies. Then things may break loose. Because of the tribal nature of their culture, they have to do things that the king wants. So Mohammed bin Salman is not the king yet. He has a lot of authority. He's effectively the king, but he's not the king. And the king wants to do the Arab Peace Initiative. So until he's gone, nothing's going to happen. But when he goes, I think things will happen. But the Iranians are going, oh, no, those Arabs, they don't like the Abraham Accords. We have a survey. Everybody's got a survey. So here's some headlines. These are from the Turkish newspapers after the meeting on Friday when they signed this agreement regarding Ukraine wheat. So here you see on the left, you see the Shoigu, the defense minister of Russia, is there. And he signs a document. And then they'll go to, and Guterres signs a document. And then they'll go down to the other end of the table. And the Ukrainian guy will sign, but he doesn't sign the same document. I don't think they both signed the same agreement. And you see Erdogan is, and all the stuff is Erdogan is central, Erdogan is central, Erdogan is central. And then they gave speeches. Guterres and Erdogan got up and talked about how wonderful it was. And so this agreement was they were going to help avert the world food crisis partially by getting the wheat out of Ukraine. By the way, the United States is in major drought in the western part of the United States. There's not going to be a lot of wheat. I mean, I hear 10% of the wheat crop in Kansas won't be harvested. And I don't think that's normal. Texas is even more. We were in Colorado last year. It looked awful in eastern Colorado. It was terrible. Western Kansas was awful. So they've signed this agreement. So I don't think it's going to alleviate the thing. Russia came out and said, well, we've taken back a lot of the eastern part of Ukraine, Donbass and Luhansk regions, but we want more. And we're going to go after more. We want to take the whole south. We want to take all the way over to the port of Odessa. And again, this is a picture from some of the wheat fields in Ukraine that are on fire. And then this morning, so they signed the agreement. And then now this is from the Washington Post and the New York Times. And it says, Russian strike on Odessa port early today imperils the UN brokered grain deal. So immediately, this is what happens whenever this happens now. The Russians come out and say, we didn't do that. It was the Ukrainians who are bombing themselves to make us look bad. They attacked their own port with missiles they don't have, maybe. It was the Americans. They snuck in and did it. But then I read Sputnik, which is a Russian news agency, in the seaport of Odessa on the territory. This is from on Telegram this morning. In the seaport of Odessa on the territory of a ship repair plant, Russian missiles destroyed a Ukrainian warship and a warehouse of Harpoon anti-ship missiles supplied by the United States. Now that I believe, but it was Russia that attacked it. And now everybody says, are they going to be able to export any grain through here? And Russia would say, well, look, we just wanted to destroy the military stuff to make it safe for ships to get in and out of there. We didn't want any anti-ship missiles sitting around, so we did everybody a favor. And then people say, oh, you believe anything the Ukrainians said? You believe anything the United States say? You need to listen to what the Russians say, because the Russians are the only one telling the truth in this, which really doesn't make any sense to me, because that's just contrary to my life experience. So we'll find out who it is. I don't think this grain deal is going to amount to much. I don't know that it's going to alleviate everything. And then there's pressure all over the world, supply chains, diesel, fuel, fertilizer, on and on and on and on. There's just a lot of problems. There's a food crisis. And this is from the Hindu magazine today. A strike on Ukrainian port at Odessa was to do a military operation. So we have all these different crises. We have Iranian nukes, nuclear. Everybody always gets on my case about saying nuclear. And I appreciate the comments, I really do. But as I tell my wife, there's some things that get written to your personal hard drive, and you just can't get them off of there. They just keep surfacing. I used to have a client, and there was like a 4-letter acronym for a company or a procedure, and he got them mixed up all the time. Drove me crazy. But it just got written to his hard drive a certain way. By the way, if you want to know on nuclear or nuclear, there's a whole Wikipedia entry on it. And by the way, every president since Dwight Eisenhower has said nuclear. Now, the Wikipedia says they just do this so they're more, they don't want to appear elite, they want to act more like the common man, who really can't pronounce anything, So even one of the founders, what was his name? Edward Teller, that's what he said. So I always say this, the purpose of language is to communicate ideas. So if I say nuclear or nuclear, you know what I'm talking about, right? So mission accomplished. We're communicating. So I'll try to be better. I actually have it spelled out phonetically here a couple times, but I'm probably still not reading it correctly. But so we have the Iranian nuke problem that's going on. And it's interesting. This is again, another conference, not the ESG conference, but the Aspen Security Conference. I guess if you want to invest in something, invest in a hotel in Aspen because they seem to be getting a lot of people coming there. This is William Burns, the head of the CIA, talking about the Iranian nuke program.
Beginning to work again on advanced centrifuges, which speed up their ability to enrich, especially to higher levels as well. For all those things, I mean, that's a concern because now that same breakout time can be measured not in a year plus, but in weeks. The second dimension, though, is how long it would take if the Iranians resumed an effort to build a weapon, a nuclear device. And there, our best intelligence judgment is that the Iranians have not resumed the weaponization effort that they had underway up until 2004 and then suspended. So that's something, obviously, we at CIA and across the U.S. intelligence community keep a very, very sharp focus on. But the trend lines are quite troubling.
Is it your judgment now that...
So he says, well, they haven't been working on it anyway, but they're advancing their centrifuges and all this stuff. They're putting all the other pieces in place. So I don't know. He's the CAA guy, so believe him or not. Immediately, Iranians said, look, see, we haven't been building this stuff for 18 years. What are you worried about? We're not going to do anything. You can trust us. Yet the IEA comes out, International Atomic Energy Agency comes out and says they're galloping ahead. So what's the truth? Well, it looks like they're moving. Now, this was Danny Anoon. I don't know if his name is Anoon. He's the caretaker president of Lebanon right now. Their government's in a big mess. And they're talking about this dispute between Israel and Lebanon over things in the Eastern Mediterranean, the gas fields. So there's two lines there, two dotted lines at the Lebanon-Israel border. The northern line is what Israel says. That's where the border is, and that really complies with international law, although they aren't signatories to the international law of the Sea Treaty. But this is the one that we should use. And Lebanon says, no, it's the south one. And then you see there's a Karish field there by the one ship. And that was, you remember the big ship that was moved into the this big ship that was, I think it was built in China, and it was moved through the Suez Canal in June and put in place at the Karish field to start drilling. And immediately, Nasrallah comes out and says, listen, that's our stuff. And Lebanese had come out and said, well, we have another line. The line is really a little bit south of the line, what they call line 23. We really want line 29. And lo and behold, that covers over the Karish gas field. And Hezbollah saying, don't you dare drill there. Don't you dare pull that gas out. We deserve the money. And we don't want Israel doing this, and we'll go to war with them. And they threw a few drones out there, as you might remember. And there were 3 drones sent on July 2nd, and Israel shot them down with missiles. It's interesting. It's been a huge propaganda thing, particularly among the followers of Hezbollah in Lebanon, which effectively controls the Lebanese government. But Lebanon is a mess. Lebanon is in total meltdown. They only have power 2 to 3 hours a day. If you want more power than that, you have to have your own private generator, which runs on diesel. So people are running all these diesel generators in Beirut. It's a complete mess. And then we also found out that there was a drone before this that Israel had shot down as well. But it's interesting that in the Lebanon newspapers, the Hezbollah newspapers, they had this editorial cartoon. And they're very clever, because Naftali Bennett, when he was still the prime minister, he came out and he said, listen, we are instituting the octopus doctrine. We're not going to go after the tentacles like Hezbollah and these different Shia militias that Iran sponsors in Syria and Lebanon. We're going after the head of the octopus. So the Hezbollah propagandists, they take that and they say, Israel's the head of the octopus, and they're taking all of our gas through their tentacles. It's a very clever editorial cartoon. And then Amos Hochstein from the United States is there trying to negotiate a deal. And as I said, they had this deal for many years. They had Line 23 was what Lebanon claimed. And then a couple months ago they said, but they never formalized it in any way. No, we want Line 29 because that does cover the Karish field and we should get that. And Hezbollah, they were like, they won't enter into an agreement with Israel anyway just because it's Israel. That's the way they feel about the Jewish state of Israel. But then they say, but don't you dare go out there because that's our stuff. In fact, if we want to expand it even further than that, we'll expand it even further than that. And Nasrallah did this all these speeches and stuff where he talked about, listen, we want it, we're going to control it, and we're sending our drones out there. They're unarmed, but we're just trying to make the workers out there so nervous that they won't come to work. So it's a problem. So I-24 News did a little report on this week. And here's what that report said, because the new caretaker prime minister of Israel, it seems like everybody's got a caretaker president. Italy, UK, Sri Lanka. I guess I can include the United States in that. It's like there's really nobody in charge anywhere, except everybody keeps doing things against your interests. Anyway, here's a report from I-24 News in Israel.
The first look at Israel's new off-sea gas platform. The Karish gas field is being hailed as a revolutionary development for Israel's energy production sector, and plans exist to export its gas to help ease the global energy crisis. But the site has also become a target for cross-border threats from within Israel's northern neighbor, prompting Israel's interim Prime Minister Yair Lapid to issue a stark warning.
Israel's prepared and ready to act against any threat. We're not heading into a confrontation, but anyone who tries to harm our sovereignty or the citizens of Israel will very quickly find out that he has made a serious mistake.
Israel is in ongoing mediation with Lebanon over the rights to the offshore field, and Lebanon's Hezbollah terror group has been beating the drums of war.
The new equation is Karish, post-Karish, and post-post-Karish.
A few weeks ago, the Iranian-backed Hezbollah sent 4 drones towards the Karish platform. All were intercepted by the Israeli Defense Forces. Beirut claims part of the gas field is in an area considered to be its exclusive economic zone, and the United States is trying to mediate a solution that will guarantee access to offshore gas fields for both countries. While reaching a solution to the long-running dispute has already been posing its challenges, one Lebanese official appears to now be trying to fold a strategic tunnel into the Israel-Lebanon dispute file.
Our sovereign rights are enshrined in our decision to reinstate every centimeter from the occupied tunnel without harming our decision to also return our land and sea borders.
First built in the 1940s during the British Mandate, the Rosh Nikra-Nakura tunnel has been shuttered since Israel's War of Independence in 1948. Granting rights to the tunnel would require Israel to give up a strategic high ground in the area, and the issue is unlikely to be broached seriously in negotiations. So for Israel, from drones to tunnels, Hezbollah continuing to be a thorn in their northern side.
So that's interesting. Now that tunnel, that's on the border between Lebanon and Israel, and the border has changed over the years, and some's under the auspices of the UN peacekeepers. And so now there's Lebanon people in the government, this member of parliament going down there and saying, that's our tunnel. And when you do that, then you recalculate where that border goes out into the ocean. And, those are really our gas fields out there with those big platforms and all this stuff that you bought. We get all the money. And so Amos Hochstein from the U.S. and Israeli people would say, well, let's sit down and negotiate. But they won't sit down and negotiate. Why? Because they're Jews on the other side. Can't do that. You can't give them any legitimacy. So it's really kind of a stalemate. So Lebanon is threatening war. And you remember this announcement by President Trump back in December of 2017 where he said, well, here's what he said. Let's watch what he said.
After more than 2 decades of waivers, we are no closer to a lasting peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. It would be folly to assume that repeating the exact same formula would now produce a different or better result. Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering. That is why, consistent with the Jerusalem Embassy Act, I am also directing the State Department to begin preparation to move the American Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Now, that was December 6th of 2017, and by May 14th of 2018, the embassy opened. But remember the reaction of the Arab countries back in those days? This is from the United Arab Emirates, which is now in part of the Abraham Accords. You see how things can kind of change? Trump crosses the red line. I went back and grabbed this today. This was from the December 7th, 2017 Gulf News. And this was true in all the Arab newspapers at the time. And even the Pope, you can see down here, I cannot silence my deep concern over the situation that has emerged in recent days. At the same time, I appeal strongly for all to respect the city's status quo in accordance with the relevant UN resolutions. That was Pope Francis talking about that. So kind of interesting that this Jerusalem thing is going to keep coming up. We know that it's prophesied, in Joel and Hosea, Zechariah, cup of trembling. It's not going to change until the Lord returns. This is kind of an interesting thing, too, that Russia has shut down a big Jewish agency which helped Jewish immigration from Russia to Israel. Now, Israel Radar, one of the open source intelligence guys that I follow on Twitter, said that Russia is doing this because they're afraid that some scientists, there's a brain drain going on. People are leaving Russia because they don't like the war and that type of thing. So Russia's directing things towards this agency. I'm not sure it's that big a deal yet, but it could turn into a big deal. Let me close with this. So I've talked a lot about one of the things that came up at this meeting with Biden and that type of thing was they allowed Israeli overflights of Saudi Arabia as a result of the Biden, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, all these meetings. And that's a big change. That has not heretofore been happening. I mean, it was unusual when President Trump in 2017 flew from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia to Israel on his first foreign trip. But we talked about Neom. This is that big city that Mohammed bin Salman wants to build and is starting to build. And because of some of the agreements reached, there's some islands at the entrance to the Gulf of Aqaba that they're turning over to Saudi Arabia control. They've been under Egyptian control, but as a result of the 1967 war, Egypt agreed that those islands would never be turned over to anyone that would blockade the Gulf of Aqaba. So they had to get Saudi Arabia on board with that. So there's been a little bit of a normalization there between Israel and Saudi Arabia, but it will now lead to Mohammed bin Salman building this city, Neom. So Bloomberg Business Week, they come out with it and they said, this is interesting place. They said some of it looks like down here in the lower right-hand corner, it says it's getting weird, the way some things are doing. And then, it's a big, long article in Business Week about all the things that Mohammed bin Salman plans. And then in this morning's, I'm pretty sure this was this morning, Saudi Arabia plans massive desert skyscraper. MBS unveils a 75-mile-long, $1 trillion skyscraper called the Mir Line that will be taller than the Empire State Building and house up to 5 million people. Well, if it's 75 miles long, it is larger than the Empire State Building, which is what, 1,200 feet tall or something like that. And he wants to build it by 2030. It's going to cost $1 trillion. Now, originally they said all of NEOM was going to cost $500 million. Then the question becomes, where is Mohammed bin Salman getting all of this money? Drive by the gas pump and see the extra money that goes, in many respects, into Saudi Arabian pockets and Russian pockets. So here's some pictures of this, what it might look like. The guy has big plans. Now, some Bible prophecy guys speculate that NEOM could be the final Babylon of Bible prophecy. Now, that will upset some of my friends who say, no, it's got to be built in Iraq. And my position is, I'll know it when I see it. There's nothing happening in Iraq on this level. I'm sorry. There's just nothing going on there. Not at this level. So here's another picture of it looking down the line. Here's a little close-in shot. And then here's some renderings of what the city might look like. And how's he going to afford it? This is also in the same Bloomberg. Expensive oil is here to stay. I think that's probably true. The world is struggling to produce the oil it needs, and the impact on global economics and politics will be profound. Why? Because everything is tied into this. If there's one thing to take away from today, is that when I ask the question, what in the world? Here's the answer. As we move further into this time, these end times, what you're going to find is everything is connected to everything else. That's why I advocate, I don't have the technical expertise to do it. I mean, the World Economic Forum made this great website where everything is interconnected. You know, you go here, you click here, it expands this, and we need to do that for Bible prophecy because I think we're going to find that there's a lot of stuff that's connected. It's going to be an interesting time. I was listening to Michael Snyder. He, if you think I'm a bummer, Michael's blog is called one of them is called the Economic Collapse blog. And he did a couple-hour talk, about hour, 48 minutes. So we'll make him the guest updater this week because he's getting up into the right time limit, you know. Length is good length of talk. But if you're prone to depression, I wouldn't go listen to it. But if you want to understand, I think he does a very good job of tying all of this together and showing how interconnected it is on an economic scale. It is going to be interesting times. Everything is changing. This is from New York Times this morning, I think. Chip shortage is upending the auto industry, even in Detroit. And we were talking about this when we played golf yesterday. Like, there's no chips. Can't get a car. Nobody has anything. It's just, there's a lot of things. So this is from Israel Radar again. Israel considers preemptive strike on Hezbollah missile and drone arsenal in case of more provocations. Debate is ongoing. There's concerns that things will not go that well for the world this year. I had another, I must have accidentally deleted them. I'll just show you because I think that they're, I'll see if I still have them in here. As I was walking up here, my presentation got corrupted, and so I had to save it in a new place. It looks like I saved it. Go get the cover of the New Economist, the European version from a week ago. And it just says that Europe is going to have a very difficult time. Chinese spyware, all this stuff, it's all interconnected. I don't know how to break it out and do it in a logical, coherent fashion. Macron came out and told the French people, turn off your lights at night because we're running out of gas. We don't have enough electricity. And they have nuclear power there somewhat. It's all unwinding. Well, you could say one or two things. It's all unwinding or it's all coming together. I prefer to think that it's coming together. So we know that, listen, the Lord returns and sets this right. Until then, we need to be busy about the Lord's work because there's a lot of people out there that want to do things on a religious, social, political level that is very damaging to people and to children, and we need to fight against that, stand for righteousness. So let's pray. Lord, pray that you'll help us to keep in mind the admonition that we see in Romans that we should always stand firm in the faith and act like men. Give us opportunities to share the gospel with people and to live and to do what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to let our light shine in darkness. And as it gets darker, our light will shine even brighter. And we pray that you will infuse us with your Holy Spirit so that we will have the power to stand in an evil day. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.